Wish is the strongest spell that a mortal can cast, allowing the user to bend reality around him or herself. The spell, however, has dire ramifications when used with higher purpose than its original intention, typically ending the life of its user when miscalculated. But has this always been the case? Was this spell always the strongest? If this is the epitome of mortal prowess, then how come villains can and have achieved great, incredible things? What power must one wield in order to summon Tiamat from the first layer of hell? What must I do in order to create all of these legendary magical items that I keep seeing? Today, we will talk about what is above level 9 spells, what is known in this world as epic magic, and we will also talk about the fabled 10th and 11th spells that disappeared from reality. Proctiv's Move Mountain was a spell that allowed you to levitate an entire mountain from its base. Not just that, but as long as the magic persisted, the levitation would be permanent, which would allow civilizations to produce floating cities and flying castles. Mavin's Create Volcano. It did what its namesake called for. It produced ash and smoke to explode out of a mountain, and within a week's time, a powerful volcano would erupt. Loulaum's Longevity. It killed everyone around the user, and then for every living being killed, the user would obtain 1 extra year of life. These are just examples of the type of power that the Netheral civilization used to wield, around 2,000 years before the present day. We're talking about floating cities in the sky, magical items overflowing from the markets, powerful magical shields that protected entire regions, and of course, wizards with uncountable skill and immeasurable talent. This might be the one time in human history in this world where magic was created specifically for the middle class, affordable and useful magic that made everyone's lives better. From magical refrigerators to voice-activated lights for the bedrooms, to glasses that magically adjusted your sight, to shoes that would just stay clean all the time. You name it, they had it. Unfortunately, they found themselves embroiled in a terrible war against the Farim, creatures seemingly capable of eating magic, who also happen to be particularly resistant against magical spells, the complete arch-nemesis of the Netheral civilization. In a brave attempt to end the war in one single swoop, what could have very well been the most powerful wizard in existence at the time, Karsus decided that this was the time to try his magnus opus. Karsus had spent the better part of the last decade working on a powerful new spell, a spell that would allow him to mantle a god. Essentially, the spell would allow him to become a god of his choosing for a limited period of time. His plan was to take the place of Mistral, the goddess of magic, and use this newfound power to win the war. To be able to use magic, you have to manipulate what we call the weave. Now, the weave doesn't have a direct definition per se, and many wizards see it as something different. Some say that it is the body of the goddess of magic. Some say that it is the energy that suffuses the universe. Some call it the source of all magic, but everyone knows that the weave is what allows a wizard to produce spells. This energy is found everywhere, and a wizard manipulates it and forms it into different forms in order to change the world. This is what somatic and verbal components are for. By weaving the right signs and producing the right notes, one can shift the weave in the air and form it into fire or ice, or to create shapes and forms in the physical world. The higher the level of the spell, the more of the weave the spell requires, and utilizing a lot of high-level spells leaves a lot of the weave damaged. Damage which has to be repaired by Mistral, the goddess of magic. Without her repairing this weave, magic would become chaotic in some places or completely cease to exist in others. This is what shapes wild sorcerers who are born in areas of wild magic. These are areas where the weave is damaged and causes people like this to be born. Now, unbeknownst to Karsus, Mistral had dedicated a large portion of her subconscious to repairing the weave at all time. So when Karsus used his grand spell to mantle the goddess of magic, he gained ultimate omniscience and hence learned of his mistake. He realized that without the goddess of magic repairing the weave, magic would cease to work. Mistral decided in that immediate moment to kill herself, which would also kill Karsus. Now, shortly after, a new Mistral was formed, a reincarnation that would be named Mystra, that would be brought forth in order to bring balance to magic once again. But for the short time between the death and the reincarnation, magic ceased to work, and the floating cities of Netheril fell into the ground and were destroyed. By the time the new goddess was formed, she barely managed to save a few of the cities, but most of the empire was done for by that point. At the point of the goddess's death, Karsus was completely petrified in his enormous bloated godly form and fell into the ground. The spell that he conveyed is now referred to as Karsus' avatar, what is known to be the only 12th level spell ever designed and ever used, and that would be the last time that anyone would have access to such high level spells ever again. This new goddess, the one that we now call Mystra, was a different person than the previous deity, having seen the disaster that had come from allowing such freedoms with magic. Old Mistral allowed anything with magic. Anyone could use it as long as they had the aptitude to use it. The new Mystra decided that it was time to set some rules so that this cataclysm would not happen again, and that's when magic changed permanently. Mystra made it so that spells that threatened the stability of the weave could never be used again, and as such, any spell higher than level 9 was now forbidden and inaccessible by any mortal hand. She made it so that only those with the natural aptitude in magic could ever use magic, since before, anyone could use cantrips. Even a farmer without any knowledge of anything could cast a cantrip as long as he knew how to move his hands the right way and say the right words. Now, you needed to be a dedicated wizard in order to be able to produce these powers. She made it so that any wizard could only keep a certain number of spells memorized at a time. So now a wizard had to spend every morning preparing which spells he would want to have in any particular day, and she also limited the amount of spells that any wizard would be able to use a day, creating the idea of spell slots. This way, the weave could not be so easily destroyed by single wizards casting dozens and dozens of spells every hour. She generally made spells harder to cast as well, by increasing the casting times and adding extra hurdles for certain spells to be made. In this sense, divine users of magic were not spared either. Clerics and paladins were also subjected to all of these changes. The one positive change for spellcasters that she made was that she changed the fact that now you didn't have to specialize in a field in order to learn higher spells of that field. See, before, you had to be an illusionist in order to be able to cast high illusionist spells. However, that would completely prevent you from casting any powerful evocation spells. Specialization was a huge thing back in the day, and it was the only way to attain higher forms of learning. Now, Mystra made it so that any wizard could access any school of magic. Her hopes in this regard was to allow wizards to help each other in all areas and use their magics for the good of all. Before Karsus' folly, arcane casters were called arcanists. But now, after all these changes, the name Wizard was created, and it is the name that we use for arcane casters up to this day. So that's why we do not have access to level 10 or level 11 spells. And to be fair, even if we did get access, no way that any one of us would be able to cast a level 12 spell. It says that Karsus needed a full decade just to work out the spell, and he still needed millions of gold pieces to make it work. And on top of that, he needed to get access to Tarask blood as a component. The interesting thing though is, even though we do not get access to level 10 or 11 spells anymore, it is still possible to reproduce these effects through other means, what we actually call epic magic. Epic magic is essentially the idea of circumventing the block designed by Mystra by including forms of handicaps into your spell casting. An easy example would be two people casting wish spells together in order to create a wish spell of stronger power. A single person can only manipulate the weave so much, but if suddenly you have 2 people, or 3, or 10 people, all manipulating the weave together, it is possible to achieve powers greater than level 9 magic. This is not the only way, however. Throughout the years, many arcane users have experimented with this form of spellcasting. The most common group are the Ancient Elves, whose arts were dubbed Elven High Magic. Elven high magic is literally epic magic, but elvish in style. The ancient elves realized that even greater power could be accomplished through epic magic if the caster would sacrifice him or herself as part of the spell. Imagine like Full Metal Alchemist, where even if you do not have the necessary components or skill, you can substitute it by giving away your life or parts of yourself. Ancient elves would consider it a great honor to die in this way, by producing incredible magical effects that would safeguard their land permanently for their life. This is how mythals were formed. Mythals are city or region-wide bubbles that created effects within the bubble. For example, in the city of Waterdeep, dragons are not allowed inside. If a dragon were to try and enter the city, he would be repelled outwards by an invisible shield. Now, in Waterdeep's case, it is not specifically a mythal that does this, but this is an example of what a mythal would do. In fact, it is literally what many mythals would do. A very popular effect would be to prevent dragons from attacking or coming inside a specific city or region. Other mythals would prevent any evocation magic from being casted from within the bubble. Others would allow you to fly and levitate whilst inside of the bubble. Any and all kinds of effects were made using this type of magic, though once again, to be able to cast this level of spell, you would need multiple wizards all capable of manipulating 9th level spells, get them together to form a single casting that would probably take months to produce, and then possibly some, if not all of them, had to die at the end of the casting to empower it even more. That's what it takes to produce epic magic. A very important part that I haven't mentioned yet is the cost of the material components, which can be exorbitant and is the main reason why it takes so long for a villain or a set of heroes to be able to produce any of these effects. To be able to replicate a level 10 spell, you need components whose value range in the hundreds of thousands. The lowest cost that I have seen is 300,000 gold pieces for the material components, and that would be for some of the weaker level 10 spells. The strongest effects typically fly around 800,000, and the highest that I have seen was around 2 million gold pieces for the material components. That is, of course, the value of the components if someone actually had the components and was willing to sell them. Getting multiple spellcasters, sacrificing parts of yourself, dying, or obtaining outrageously powerful magical components are all ways for you to be able to reproduce effects higher than level 9 spells. The types of spells that you would get access to are technically unlimited, mostly because you would be essentially relying on yourself to create the spell. These spells haven't really been written down and do not really exist. You're literally creating them as you go, but many of these recreations have been accomplished in the past, and here are some examples of what has been done before. The type of magic that you could get access to if you so but grasp this source of power. You could raise an island from the sea. As a lich, you could split your phylactery into multiple phylacteries, forcing your enemies to destroy each and every single one of them to kill you, like Voldemort in Harry Potter. You could create an entire new race of magical beasts, like the creation of the owlbear or the manticore, and your creation could reproduce with those of its kind, allowing you to literally form a new species. You could become permanently immune to spells from level 1 to 9th level spells, and if such spell would target you, you would redirect it back. You could create poisonous rain that, if touched, would transform you into an undead. These are examples of epic spells that have been done in the past. These are canon spells, and they are all achievable. This is what can be made. Unfortunately, only the elves truly delved into this form of magic, as humans at the time focused exclusively on using normal 10th and 11th level magic. So after that type of magic was deemed banned, humans regressed tremendously and fell back culturally. Elves, on the other hand, stopped using High Elven magic because they personally deemed it too dangerous as well. The amount of materials needed and the fact that typically you would require the sacrifice of a high caster meant that casting these spells just wasn't worth it many of the times, especially since success wasn't always guaranteed. Having a caster that can cast a level 9 spell be sacrificed is a huge deal in any culture. Those people are extremely rare as it is, so they stopped working this type of magic and they stopped teaching this type of magic, to the point where only a select group of extremely old elves within the inner circles know the fundamentals on how to make them work, which means that nowadays epic magic is as rare as it can be. I do also want to point out that everything that I just said also generally applies to magic item creation. After Mystra's ban, she also made it extremely difficult to produce magic items, which fell into the same category. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have the time, please check out my series on Elder Scrolls Skyrim, where we go through the game finding every secret and every hidden lore tidbit found within. I'm really proud of Lore Play Skyrim, and I think that you might like it. Please go and check it out. Also, thank you so much Wyatt Curlin, Toby Oliver, Dylan Baker, Zach Bowell, and Casey Butler for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRhexx to support. Thank you once again so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.